So two separate terminologies, both using Snomed identifiers, but quite different structures. We've got this kind of hierarchical structure of Snomed, and you can navigate down to a single medicinal product or medicine through multiple routes. The one I've got on my screen shows navigating down through the structural hierarchy, but we could equally have gone through medicinal products categorized by disposition and gone down as an enzyme inhibitor and arrived still at the afatinib product. On the right hand side of the screen, we've got the Dmd model, which is a 5-box model. So we have the VTM, the virtual therapeutic moiety, which is just the medicine thing, the afatinib, no presentation, no strength. We've got the virtual medicinal product, which is the generic product. And then we've got the actual medicinal product as we follow down, and that's the branded entity from a particular supplier. And then the two right-hand boxes are the pack presentation, so the pack of 20 tablets or 30 tablets or whatever. What we've actually got here is a representation of what happens when we bring Dmd into Snomed, because Snomed is updated, international Snomed is updated at the moment once every 6 months. Dmd is updated every week. And what we do is we take the Dmd data and we import it into Snomed and we find parents for it. So we add it to the very bottom level of the hierarchy, is the general place where our items fit. And this is a fairly simple representation of what happens when things are straightforward. And here we have, and I'm not sure why, I think this must have some timer thing on it. We have a product called afatinib. And when we bring this in to Snomed, the identifier used in Dmd is already the Snomed identifier. So that's quite simple, it just slots across, and both terminologies use the same ID. We've also got the 30 milligram tablets, and again, the identifier used in Dmd is the same one, and it just slots across into Snomed. Now, we also have here what happens when there is no equivalent in this international data at the time this is created in Dmd. And what happens here is that we've allocated our identifier, and when we import this into Snomed, because there is no existing equivalent, it keeps its identifier and it just slots into the hierarchy. It's a very straightforward process, and if they were all like this, life would be lovely. What we also have on this next slide is what shows when the terminologies get out of synchronization, because both of these terminologies are updated independently. As I say, Dmd is a weekly process. Snomed international data is a 6-monthly process. And what we do in the UK drug extension is we gather up 4 weeks of Dmd and publish it every 4 weeks. So there are times when we create something in Dmd and we don't have access to a code in the international data for a variety of reasons, which I can't go into. So we allocate an extension identifier to that concept. When we bring that concept into Snomed, if there is deemed to be that product already present, the Dmd identifier is made inactive, and a same as relationship is created to the concept in the international data. Now, you could say, well, it's there, but it's inactive. And when things are inactive, what that means is they're removed from the main Snomed hierarchy. So they have no attributes. There is no active ingredient, as you can see with this concept. There is no dose form, there is no parent. And if you've got things like ref sets built using the Snomed hierarchy, so for instance, if you say in my ref set, I want all descendants of pharmaceutical and medicinal product, this concept would not be returned into your ref set. So an inactive concept effectively is just a concept ID and a description. and nothing else. So it is important, and using an inactive concept really is just sending a term string pretty much. It's not helpful. So that is one of the main issues with the differences between the two terminologies, that concept status can be different. Now, another way that the two terminologies differ is we have the Dmd model, which is it's this 5-box model, it's fixed, and each VMP, each generic product, has one parent VTM. So for something that has a single ingredient, like paracetamol 500 milligram tablet, it has a VTM of paracetamol. For a combination product, so for example, your paracetamol and codeine tablets, it has, again, a single VTM of paracetamol and codeine. When we look in Snomed, we can see we have a slightly different pattern, because in Snomed, this one is ezetimibe and simvastatin. I really chose the easy to pronounce words today. And we can see that in Snomed, we've got the product right at the bottom of the slide, and then we've got several intermediate classes before we get to the VTM equivalent concept of ezetimibe and simvastatin. And then if we navigate further up the hierarchy, we've actually got another VTM of ezetimibe on its own. And if we'd taken the other route as we traversed up the hierarchy, we would also find a single parent of simvastatin. So the structure is different between the two terminologies, and that's really what I wanted to sort of highlight with this slide. Then when we actually look at the concepts in Snomed, we can see that they have a lot of attributes. I suspect that most people will not be able to read this slide unless their eyesight is considerably better than mine. But the takeaway from this is that when we look at the modelling applied to a concept which is present in both Dmd and in Snomed, but this is the Snomed version of the data, it has a lot of attributes associated with it. And some of these appear duplicated, if you will, because what we've got is we have got a dispensed dose form. We also have a manufactured dose form. Now, the sources of these informations are different, and they have slightly different editorial policies, which is why they both exist. And if we just go to the next slide, and these two smaller models on the right-hand side show that some of the data on the left comes from Snomed International and is only present in Snomed, and some of the data is present in both Snomed and in Dmd. And the UK allocated attributes, so things like the dispensed dose form is the Dmd dose form. The manufactured dose form is the Snomed International dose form. We also have, and they've just arrived on the bottom of the screen here, there's a certain amount of data which is in Dmd only, and these are things like strength information, presentation size, and there are also a lot of pieces of information as you go to the actual pack level around price and formulary prescribing, and those we didn't bring in to Snomed. There was a reason for that, which was at the time that we actually developed the Snomed drug extension, there was no way to represent numeric values in Snomed, so they weren't added in. If people felt that they were essential and they needed this information in Snomed, we can work towards achieving that. Snomed has now changed its model and they're using concrete domains to represent numeric values, so that could be done, but it wasn't done at the time. This next slide that we have is about one of the other differences between the two terminologies, and that is that Snomed is an international terminology. So it has, and this is a fairly simple example, this is paracetamol 500 milligram tablets, which the Americans call acetaminophen, or did call acetaminophen, and that is in Snomed as a synonym. Dmd doesn't support synonyms at all. Dmd has just a preferred term. And when we bring Dmd products into Snomed, what we actually do within the UK is the Dmd term is highlighted as the preferred term, and you can access that using the realm description ref set within Snomed. And that means that the term applied to concepts which are referenced in both Dmd and Snomed, the preferred term will always be the same thing. And so that's how we achieve that, because Dmd has quite strict rules around terming, pluralization, word order, and dose forms. So really sort of a summary of the differences of the two terminologies. We have different release cycles and we have different release formats. Snomed is in RF2, Dmd is in the XML. So at the moment, Snomed international data is every 6 months and Dmd is weekly. Snomed has additional concept classes compared to Dmd. It has things like trade family and trade family group, which are the representations of the brands. It also has the intermediate concept classes between the VMP and VTM, which Dmd doesn't have. The concept status between the two terminologies may be different. There are different parent-child relationships within the two terminologies because Snomed is international, so it obviously represents products that are not at all available in the UK. It also has some different parent relationships because Snomed is a larger terminology, and it has grouper concepts. For example, it groups things by being penicillins, it groups things by being enzyme inhibitors, it groups things as nitrates, whereas Dmd doesn't go higher than the just the drug level, basically. There is the additional data in Snomed, which is international data, which we have to, as part of our Snomed license, provide within the UK, although you can filter it out because you can see where the source relationships come from. There are concept attributes that are only in Dmd at the moment, and as I said, most of those relate to numeric values or the values around prescribing and formulary. The terming conventions are different between the two, but that has been addressed to some extent because of the use of the realm description ref set, so you can identify the same term that's applied within Dmd and within Snomed. So differences. Then this next slide is about Dmd as a standard. Dmd is an NHS interoperability standard, which means that Dmd is the terminology to be used for the transmission of medicines information between systems. And these are just a couple of clips from the ISB, the SKY standard information. And they talk about it is for interoperability. So within your system, you can do what you like. It's when messages are sent from one system to another, they need to be Dmd. It's also worth pointing out that actually the scope of the standard is only medicines. It doesn't cover devices. Its primary purpose is to support interoperability. And the other thing that I think is probably quite important to note is that you don't have to take all the components in the model. So for example, in primary care prescribing systems, because that prescribing is only carried out at VMP and AMP level, those are the only two concept classes that they take. They don't take pack sizes in for prescribing, and they don't take the VTM level in because their prescribing is not carried out at those levels. So if you take an element, you have to take all of it, but you don't have to take all the elements. And then we have, now I realise that that is a lot of information that I've given to people. So on the final slide, I have some links to information that I think might be helpful to you. We've got the UK drug extension documents, which is the data model and the editorial policy. and there's a link to where you can find those. There's the Dmd editorial policy and data model, and a link to that page. And there is also a link to the SKIES standard, which gives you an implementation guide, and it also gives you information about the standard. And I think that is it. So if you have any questions, please feel free. I can elaborate further. I can hopefully explain why if you've got questions.
Emma. Hi, it's Neil Jones. 2 questions. Firstly, how can a drug be inactive? Because it hasn't ceased to exist. It might not be purchasable today, but the concept still exists. And secondly, some of the GP systems do actually have pack information in them.
The drugs are inactive in Snomed because they are duplicates to an existing concept.
Why would you not link it to the existing one then?
Really, because the 2 terminologies are updated independently. At the moment, Dmd is synchronized to the July 2020 international data. So all the time we are actually creating content, we're linking it to the July 2020 data at the moment. When we move to the January 2021 data, there will be a period of harmonization where we do update the identifiers in Dmd. It is quite a manual process though, and there are potentially quite a lot of changes, so it's not instantaneous. There are also instances where we have used an international identifier, and that will be inactivated for a reason within the international data. That may be because there's a lack of clarity, or because the dose form is not quite aligned to the editorial policy. And again, we would aim to align that, and we will update the identifier in Dmd, but there will be a period of time where the 2 are not the same.
In that case, would it be sensible to synchronize the version of Snomed and Dmd and implemented choosers? So don't update to the latest international version until it would be appropriate.
We don't update, well, there is, the international data has actually already been published for January.
No, I mean the supplier don't take the latest version until Dmd's got to a certain point.
So really just hold off publishing versions of Dmd until we're synchronized again?
No, I mean a system supplier adding Snomed to their system when Dmd's caught up, in effect, so that they are the same.
That would be one way forward, yes.
Okay, can I just interrupt? So you'd lose all the clinical information as well. So you'd lose anything that's been added about COVID if you didn't update your Snomed and had to wait until Dmd caught up.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Tony.
So can I ask a question now then? So the FHIR resource for medications says to use effectively Snomed and things within the Snomed hierarchy. So how does that square with using Dmd when the 2 things are out of sync?
Yeah, this is an issue that we are aware of, and working with the FHIR community and resources. But yeah, we are aware that there is a mismatch between the SKIES standard and the FHIR resources. I don't have a magic answer for you today. Sorry, Tony.
And do we know?
Is that a question about the fire resources then, or is it?
It's a question about the reference in the fire resources.
Yeah, that can point to any valid code. So you can point to a valid Snomed code.
And that's something.
DMD.
Yeah, I mean, we're waiting for an identifier to be issued so we can update the fire profiles.
Issued by who?
What we're anticipating.
Terminology people in NHS Digital who control these things.
And the value set referenced will be Dmd, not Snomed. That's what we're anticipating.
So Emma, if I may, a question for you then. So if I've understood it correctly, because you're creating new codes more rapidly than is happening internationally, then you kind of get ahead of the international. And then when you synchronize, you kind of do a period of reconciliation where you kind of look for anything that's come out in the international version, which you've got a corresponding Dmd code in, and then you align them back together again. So as a consequence of that, it's kind of normal procedure, I guess, for a lot of Dmd codes to start their life of being active and then become inactive as they get harmonized into the international version. So from a finger in the air, you know, so percentage-wise, how many Dmd codes end up being inactive because they kind of catch, because most of the drugs I guess we use are not UK drugs, they're international drugs. So most of them will end up in the international version sooner or later. So is it not the case that most Dmd drugs will end up being inactive at some point?
It is a possibility, yes. I don't have a finger in the air notion. Percentage-wise, there has been a lot of churn recently because Snomed International has been tidying out their hierarchies, if you will. There are differences in our editorial policy versus Snomed. So, for example, our injectables, we represent vials and ampoules and things. Snomed doesn't. So those kind of things will never go into the international data just because of a difference in editorial policy. And equally, any AMPs will never go into the international data. Neither will the pack sizes. So VMPPs and AMPPs will never go into the international data. But VTM and VMPs, there is significant churn. And I suspect that people like Tony might be able to give you better stats on those. On the, I think, positive side, Snomed International are working towards more frequent releases. So that will hopefully mean that there is less of a lag.
From our perspective, the problem's more significant the other way around, where Snomed International have discontinued or made inactive concepts, and Dmd haven't got round to updating to the new identifier provided by NHSD, and it is proving to cause clinical issues. So we have a specific example where the VTM for coamoxiclab is inactive in Snomed, and that's a very serious potential concern if somebody has got that concept recorded in their medical record as an allergy, that they won't trigger decision support.
On that subject of the Dmd codes becoming inactive, they'd only be active with a sort of temporary code for a while, wouldn't they? So most of the actual uses of that Dmd code will be after it's been put into Snomed, and then for the next forever it'd be done by the Snomed code. So you'll get a few instances of it prescribed on what's effectively a temporary ID, which is kind of inevitable because you haven't got a global ID at that point. And then it switches to a global ID, and then you're good forever. But I don't see what an alternative would be. It seems a reasonable approach.
In my example, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I know, but this is more about Richard's point of they're all temporary. That is true, yes, but the other way around is, yeah, your point, Tony, is a different one, isn't it? That's a real problem.
Have we got any idea how quickly DMD will be able to catch up with these?
Well, we're already starting to work towards harmonising with the next Snomed release, but I can't give you finite timescales on it. No, I mean, what we are hoping is that we've had quite a period of churn in the international data while they've had a tidy up and a restructure, and we're anticipating that it will be a lot more stable. But that's an anticipation, not an absolute. But yeah, we do know that the difference in the concept status, I think that probably is the biggest issue really between the two terminologies.
Richard Kavanagh, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so that's from before. I'll take it down.
Emma, do you mind if I add something in? It's Jo Golding, Head of Pharmacy Terminology. Just listening to a lot of comments, yes, I agree that the main issue we have here is harmonisation between the two models. And that's as a result of history and, of course, politics as ever. And there's a couple of things that are coming up this year that we really want to concentrate on, a couple of our key high priority things within the team. The first one is to look at harmonising the current content within the Snomed CT UK drug extension with the new core and national extension models that Snomed International have put out. It's fair to say that the drug extension was made at a time when no one else was doing Snomed drug extensions, and it was in RF1, and we pretty much made it up as we went along to try and fulfill the use case in the UK. Now that there are Snomed International models available, we need to look at seeing how we can do it properly within the RF2 model and try and harmonise on something a bit more stable that actually sits within the Snomed International suite of products. So that's one thing we're doing. And probably the biggest priority, if we're looking at synchronising the Dmd and Snomed drug extension releases, what at the end goal would be that they are completely synchronous and completely contemporaneous as well. So they are in real time, the same things, just two different release formats. And very aware that's a long way to go. But obviously the comments that we've picked up today is that that's also a really important thing to do. And it's, as I said, it's something that's on the agenda to look at this year. I think we're starting it now and hopefully looking at giving some plans in the next financial year. And to add on to that as well, we're planning on doing, Cesaro are planning on doing a potential breakout session at the hackathon to talk about the Dmd and Snomed drug extension and see what people think about which way to go, which one's most important and what fulfills more use cases, just get a feel of what's actually out there already and what people are using. So it'd be really good if people can actually join that to give us some idea of which direction we need to go in.
Have anybody else got any more questions? Okay, thank you, Emma, for a tour de force of that. I think you put your email in the chat if anybody has any questions they want to follow up from that. And if you haven't got, is there anybody on the call who hasn't got details of the hackathon? If you'd like to raise your hand, I'll dig them out and post them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll assume you've all got it and I won't have to look for it. Well, that proved to be very interesting. We had 36 people on the call at the peak. There's still 33 left. One or two people joined very much towards the end. I think, as Helen said at the beginning, the recording will be made available with the hackathon material in due course. So if you didn't catch much of the presentation, you will be able to at a later date. So thanks everybody for your time and look forward to talking to you all again.
Thanks, you.
Thanks.
Thank you.